Hello, it's Taylor Sisson here. I got part 3 of our video series on using Arena software, and today we're going to be looking at the assign module. The assign module is used to manipulate values inside your simulation. Most of the time this is going to be an attribute or a variable, and remember we talked about those two values in the first video, but we didn't go quite into detail on necessarily how to use those. So we're going to get an idea of how to use those in this video. So let's start by opening up example 3, which is the one we were working on in the last video. And remember we had a module here that counted the number of bad parts that came through the system. We can achieve the same outcome that this module gives us using an assign module. So start out, let's delete this count, or record module. Let's hit the delete key, and let's bring in an assign module and put it in about the same place. And let's go ahead and run our paths. Let's make sure Smart Connect's on. It is. And come out of the false and go into the assign module, out of the assign module and into the machine works on part. And now we have our pathing. Now let's add some logic. So let's take a look at the assign module. Remember, you can click a module and everything that you can manipulate will be down here, which is good when there's lots of modules in your simulation. But for now, let's just double click on this module and bring up this window here. Now notice we can name the module. So let's name it bad part pass, because each bad part is going to pass through this module. Now underneath this we've got a list of assignments. These are the values that you're going to be manipulating. Now if we'll click the add button, a new window comes up allowing us to add a new assignment. Now notice our first value here is type. This is the type of value that we're going to be changing. Of course you have variable, which remember from our first video, a variable is a global value that's part of your simulation. And remember, a simulation is simply just a program, and it actually is written in a certain language that you can view through Arena, but we won't worry about that for now. But just recall what a variable is. You can also have variable arrays of 1 dimension and 2 dimension. 1 dimension is like a list, 2 dimensions is like a table. We'll stick to just 1 for now. And you can also change attributes. And remember, attributes are values that are attached to entities. You can also change the entity type, so you can change the entity from one thing to something completely different after it moves through this assign module. You can also change the picture. Then of course there's other, which basically is so you can have a little bit of flexibility and put in exactly what you want. For this video, we're just going to stick to variable, attribute, and entity picture. So let's start out with a variable, and let's put in a variable name. Now, when we're in these basic process modules, Arena will actually take and initialize any variable we put in right here. Usually, with programming, if you put in a variable somewhere, you would have to go and initialize that variable manually. Luckily, Arena's got this GUI interface, which will automatically create it for you. Let's call it bad parts. And what we want to do with bad parts is we want to have it become incremented by 1 each time a part moves through this assign module. So let's call this bad parts, and put +1. And basically what we've done here is we've taken this variable that we made here and put it into the actual expression here. And if that confuses you, you can simply take and put in x for this variable if you wanted to. That'll give you the same outcome. And that's much less confusing because we're familiar with using letters for variables. But let's call it bad parts. Now, there's a little bit of a flaw in our logic here, and it was also in the last one, which it's okay, but this doesn't actually count the number of bad parts coming through, because if you think about it, a part can come through multiple times. So really this is how many times a bad part passes through. So keep that in mind. If you want to count the number of bad parts, you would have to use a decide module and reroute it and things like that. We won't worry about that for now. This is just so you get a little understanding of how a variable works. But just keep that in mind, that that's part of the logic there. Alright, if you hit OK, as our system stands right now, it's going to do the same thing as the record module we had. It's just going to have a variable value that it's using to count. Now to view the variable, you can click on the variable button over here, and you'll notice a little spreadsheet comes up down here. And if you look here, you've got initial values. And if you click that, by default it's 0, which is what we want because by default there are no bad parts that have passed through. And it's 0.0 by default. It's an integer value, so if you really want to keep things neat, you can double click it and change it to just a 0 and hit enter. And notice this becomes it says 1 rows now. That's because we actually put in a custom value. Okay, so that logic's simple enough. Let's see what else we can achieve with the assign module. Let's say that a part comes through and it is bad. Okay. Now after a part is bad so many times, we decide that it's not reworkable any longer. It's been salvaged too many times and there's nothing we can do with it. So it's not going to be a good finished product. So what we can do is go back to our assign module, click add, go to attribute, and we do that because we want to count how many times a certain entity has passed through the bad part rework process. So let's call this variable, or excuse me, let's call this attribute passes, so we know how many times it's passed through. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to take the variable, or rather the attribute, and we're going to put it down here, and we're going to put +1. So it's going to go up by 1 every time an entity passes through here. So you might be confused thinking these do the same thing, but they do not, because remember, a variable is a global value. So this will be counting, and this will be counting just for a certain entity. Now, just for animation's sake, let's add one more little change. Let's say that every time an entity it doesn't go straight through this process, so it becomes a bad part. We want to show that in the animation. So to do that, we're going to go to Entity Picture. And if you'll recall from an earlier video, the default entity picture is a blue ball. So let's say we want a red ball to represent a bad part. So we're just going to put in picture.redBall and hit OK. So once an entity passes through this assign module, it will change into a red ball. Alright, so that's all we need from this assign module, so hit OK. And now we've got everything set up, but we don't know how to throw away the entity if we need to. So we're going to take this connection here and let's delete it. And in order to decide whether we want to throw a part away or not, we're obviously going to need another decide module. So let's bring one of those in. And let's go ahead and connect it up. We're going to come out of the assign module and we're going to go into the decide module. Now this decide module is going to decide if a part has been reworked too many times. So if it's true, we want to get rid of it. If it's false, that is, it hasn't been reworked too many times, we want to rework it. So from the false side, we're going to come out and go back to our process. And then for the true side, we want to get rid of it. Now you might be thinking to yourself, we could just run out here and just go into this dispose module, which we could do, but then we would have a problem with our output because you would just be counting all the parts that go out of the system, whereas what we want to know is how many parts actually were good and got shipped out and how many were bad and got thrown away. So to do that, we're just going to put in a whole separate dispose module. And we're going to go from the true side, meaning it's been reworked too many times, it found that condition true, and go to this dispose module. Now let's go ahead and double click on this dispose module, and let's rename it. And let's call it part is disposed. And hit OK. And that's all you got to do for that module. Now we got to look at the logic of this decide module. And remember from last time, this decide module was based off of chance, whereas this one is going to be based off of a particular condition. Now I'm going to take this chance to go ahead and save my work. I'm going to put it as example 4 so we can use it later. And you want to get into a habit, of course, of saving as much as possible. Okay, anyway, carrying on. If you will double click on the decide module, you'll have the window come up here where we can change everything about it. Now we're going to give it a name. And let's call it decide if trash. Okay? And instead of by chance this time, we're going to do two-way by condition. Now, you get a condition here, and this is what's going to be checked to decide whether it's true or false. Now, we don't want to check entity type. What we want to check is a particular attribute. So basically what this is going to do, as the entity moves into the decide module, this is going to check a particular attribute that we define that's attached to that entity. So pull down this menu, and if you'll scroll to the bottom, you'll see passes that we made earlier. Click on it. And now what do we want to do? We want to check and see if it's been reworked too many times. So let's say 2 times is the maximum amount of times we want to rework any one part. So what we want to change this to is greater than, and we're going to put the value 2. So anytime a part comes into this decide module and it has a value of 3 on how many times it's passed through, it's going to get thrown away. Otherwise, it's going to be found false, and it's going to go back to the machine to be worked on again. Now hit OK, and I believe our system is ready to go. We've got all of our logic set up. We can check our attributes. We've got passes, that's the only one we need, and by default it's 0, which is what we desire. And of course we checked on our variables already, so that looks good. And I believe we are ready to go. So let's go and check our run setup. And I'm going to change the speed to 0.0004. I think that was let's go 3.7. I think that's a good speed to watch it. Let's check our replication parameters. Everything looks good. It's the same from our old model. And hit OK. And give it a save. I recommend saving before every run. And let's hit go. And now notice it goes to work. Now, okay, and see that changed to a red ball. That means it's been through the bad part area at least one time. And now, probably with this short of a run, there's probably not going to be any parts disposed, mainly because there's only an 8% chance that a part is bad anyway. So that means there's a really low probability that a part's going to pass through this 3 times. So let's hit stop real fast. And let's go to this decide module, and let's say the percent true is only 20%. Now this will become a very inefficient system, but we're just going to use that to show how this logic works down here. So let's watch it for just a minute. Notice pretty much each part is bad. There's basically an 80% chance that a part is bad. And it'll take probably a minute, but eventually a part will go through this more than twice, and it will be disposed. And then this counter will go from 0 to 1. Okay. Let's see if this one goes. Nope. Alright, well, it'll go eventually. So, hopefully you understood the logic of this model. If you've got any questions, feel free to comment or give me a private message, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more tutorials. There will be more in the future. Thank you for watching.